Fathers of Reddit. In honor of Father's Day, what was your don't tell your mother about this moment? Not a father, but I have a wholesome story of my own dad. I was born very early, at only 4 pounds. On top of that, or possibly as a result, I have a fragile immune system, especially so when I was young, and up until a few years ago, I got seriously sick, fever, vomiting, sore throat, the whole shebang, 5 times or more a year. I would become so dehydrated from vomiting or get such a high fever that at times, I had to be brought into the emergency room. As a result, I drank exclusively Pedialyte to counter that when sick, and I developed a serious distaste and hate for the stuff. My dad was responsible for bathing me one night to help me cool down. I must have been 6 or 7 at the oldest. We were on a vacation, and even as an adult, I always get really sick during or after traveling, and I had inconveniently gotten sick while we were staying in a hotel. I'd had a high fever, and my body was so sore and tired I'd slept for 24 hours, no one could wake me up, and I hadn't drank anything in that time. So my dad put in front of me a very big glass of Pedialyte and told me I had to finish the whole thing while I sat in the bath. I took it as obediently as I could, but a fourth of the way in, I just felt so miserable and mad that I started sobbing. My dad had this heartbreaking look on his face, and stroked my hair, near tears himself. It was late, and we were tired, so he wrapped me up in a towel, and put me in bed with he and Mom. My dad drinks a lot of Mountain Dew, and he told me that for every 3 sips of Pedialyte I get down, I can have a sip of soda to help wash out the bad taste, but don't tell Mom. I never did, and it's one of my favorite memories of me and my dad. In my second year of college, my best friend committed suicide. We were all pretty heartbroken, so my mom and dad drove up from the next province to be with me. My dad, being a great cook, decided he would cook my roommate/friends and I a nice dinner to bring everyone together during the bleak moment. My dad and I ended up getting completely shit-faced, as one tends to do during heartbreaking times. He got embarrassed at his drunken state, and snuck out the back door and jumped in a cab without saying goodbye. I was upset he disappeared like that, but he also still had the car keys I needed so I could drive my friends and I to the funeral the next day. I called him and asked him to get out of the cab, and that I would meet him at whatever street corner he was at, which he did. When I found him, he was sitting in the stoop of an apartment building puking and crying. I rolled up and together we staggered home drunk and crying arm in arm. When we got back to my apartment, he was still embarrassed, so he asked to sleep in the car. I said okay, grabbed him a blanket, Pringles, and a Gatorade for midnight munchies. I go back inside and no sooner did I sit down did I get a text from him saying he was cold and wanted to come in. I went and got him from the car and he was covered in Pringle crumbs. Like covered. I dragged him up the sketchy spiral staircase to my apartment and the last thing he said before he went inside and to bed was, "God, your stairs are like fucking Hogwarts, man. Please don't tell your mother." And he passed out. One night when I was about 8, after I had gone to bed, my dad was playing a Nintendo game, Legend of Zelda I think. We had both been playing it but we were stuck. He finally found a secret passage, paused the game, and came upstairs to wake me up. He told me he figured out where we were stuck, snuck me downstairs in a blanket. I'm sure my mom knew, and I got to stay up after midnight on a school night, hiding under a blanket, to see where the hidden passage went. It was a silly little incident, but very memorable. Edit, wow. It's one of those blew up overnight situations. Thank you all for the awards and sharing your own versions of the story. I'm glad this warmed so many hearts. Edit 2, don't read if you don't want the fields ruined. A few asked about my relationship with my dad. We actually weren't that close, and still aren't, because reasons. But this story stands out in my memory not just because it was awesome and wholesome, because it wasn't like him. Edit 3, As to the specifics of the game/secret passage, after some googling, I can't find a Zelda-related secret that matches my memory. I recall a path that is going east then turns south. To the right there's an ocean, and if you just keep going east instead of turning south, there's a hidden path where you can walk over the ocean. We played several similar games with that old top-down view. Could have been Dragon Warrior, 8 Eyes, or so many others. Maybe someone on here can figure it out? Edit 4, thanks to the hive mind for figuring out it was Zelda 2, when you get the water boots and can walk over the water to get to the ocean palace. It's great to fill in the gaps of a nice childhood memory. When I was 12 or so I walked into my dad's office to find him counting money. He says don't tell mom and you'll find out what it's for. So I don't say a thing. 2 days later he wakes me up early to run errands with him. We came back with a new, used, but new for us, car. He also said if I don't tell how much he spent on it he'll let me drive it. It was only a couple $100 but we were broke and she would have been mad. My mother tried so hard to find out but I kept the secret. So anytime we were in an open space like an empty lot he would let me drive it. I felt like the coolest kid in middle school knowing how to drive a car. Again, don't tell your mother he says. It was our secret thing and I'll cherish those memories forever. When I got my permit at 16 I was so excited to drive it for real. I ask my mother if I can drive her around when she has to go out but she says absolutely not since I have no experience. Well, I can't argue because I don't want to get dad in trouble. This goes on for a few weeks, I keep asking, she keeps telling me no. This finally happened one day while dad was home and overheard. He comes in the room, gives me a nod and says to my mother she's a better driver than you anyway, tosses me the keys and tells mom everything. I was so stoked and cheering. I can drive. I can drive. Dad says drive it? No. If you can keep a secret for that long you can keep the car too. 20 years later it's still one of my favorite memories. When we were kids my dad took me and my sister out on a bike ride. My sister had her own bike while I was sat in the kiddie seat on his. At some point we come to a stop, and I guess my sister was still a little unsteady on her bike because she started wobbling. In a bid to help, my dad leaned over to steady her, so much so that I flipped right out of the seat. In true 90s fashion there was only the single buckle to keep me in, and landed right onto asphalt. I was fine except for the deep scrapes right across my face and abdomen. It was completely an accident but my dad panicked and told both of us, "Oh God, don't tell mom," and ushered us home to patch me up. He caught some hell from mom because he couldn't hide a face injury, especially when it started scabbing over into an ugly mess, but he impressively managed to conceal the rest by volunteering to be the one to bathe me and put me to bed every night. It got found out anyway a couple weeks later when we were playing with an inflatable pool and a family friend was like, "Goodness, what is all that?" Not a father, mine passed, but as his daughter I'm sure this is definitely his biggest don't tell your mother moment, with me at least. I can't speak for my brothers. I was about 13-14 and had chronic insomnia. My dad worked nights, so on his days off he'd often still be up late. I was burning some mix CDs on my computer and ran out of blank discs, so I went into the lounge to go get a couple more from the cupboard. I walk in on dad watching lesbian porn. I remember 2 blondes with huge fake boobs. Dad flinched. I covered my eyes and for some reason thought to myself, well, I've seen it now, and made my way over to the cupboard at the other side of the room to still get those blank discs. Walked out without saying a word. The next morning, Dad came down to me and said, "Please don't tell your mother." I never did. A couple of years later he got really sick, and after about 10 years of severe COPD he passed away. I look back on this and laugh. It was gross to see, sure, but looking back it's funny. And it reminds me of a time when he was healthy. Damn, I miss that man. Not the father, the daughter. Parents always had money problems. Dad saw an amazing investment opportunity, he claimed, and said he was going to buy it without consultation. Told me not to tell. He kept it for 3 years, worked on it and flipped it for a double of what he bought it for, so it worked out, but during those 3 years, he had me fudge the numbers every time Mom asked, because he was paying the repayments on it with me tagging along all the time. Mom also hated his sisters. So every time we went out to my aunt's places, he would make me lie to her if she asked. It got so normal that by the time I was in my teens, he didn't even need to. I'd automatically make up a plausible excuse. Oh, amazing thing Dad did, but told me to hide it from Mom. One cousin was orphaned early on, the dad died, the mom got sick and subsequently died 2 years on. Bright kid, absolutely no resources except for scrapes from extended family. Her mom was on super bad terms with my mom when she died. So can't mention my cousin in the house, also because tons of existing money problems. Dad got cousin a computer, took her shopping for clothes, we'd take her out for ice cream, or treats, once a month or so, and every week we'd participate in a roster to pick her or send her to tuition and extracurricular activity. I'm convinced Mom still doesn't know. Not a father, but the son. One time when I was younger, my dad took me to the zoo while my mom was visiting with my grandparents, so her parents. I had a nasty habit of climbing on anything that looked like it could support a kid's weight, the living room couches and entertainment center, trees, cars, the roof of our house, etc. How I never got hurt was either a miracle or sheer dumb luck, depending on who you ask. Anyway, I was up to my usual bullshit when we were at the zoo, walking along the retaining walls of the animal enclosures, and this was well before rational reasoning skills set in and I could have known that these were dangerous animals that would have killed my 7-year-old ass without even thinking about it. To me, they were just the cool animals I saw on the Discovery Channel or in cartoons. Naturally, it was only a matter of time before I fell into an animal enclosure and my dad looked back to see where I had wandered off to. Around that time he hears some woman scream, "Oh my God, there's a kid in the bear pit." At least he knew where I was. LMAO. Much like the kid that fell in Harambe's pit, I had fallen into a pit of water that I later learned was slightly separated from the bears, but bears being curious animals, they noticed my presence and decided to wander over to check me out. I remember being upset that I was all wet for about 5 seconds before starting to splash around and then seeing about 2 or 3 black bears slowly walking over to me and sniffing me out. Keep in mind that I lived, and still do live, in Central Texas, so there's no bears around for miles. The idea of making yourself seem bigger or fighting back was about as foreign to my young brain as translating the Iliad from its original Greek at the time. Thankfully by this time my dad had alerted the zoo staff, and from what I was told when I got older and asked about it, a couple of workers distracted the bears with food while another worker grabbed me and got me the hell out of there and back to my dad. From what I was told, a small crowd had gathered by this point, but thankfully this was before cell phones with cameras were a thing, so I didn't get ripped on by my classmates whenever I went back to school for being a dumb ass because they saw me on live leak or whatever. After my dad got a hold of me, dried me off, and read me the riot act, he bought me a bag of cotton candy I had asked for since we didn't get to see the rest of the zoo that day, and told me he'd only get it if I promised not to tell Mom about the ordeal. I agreed since I wanted the cotton candy, and I think he told my mom that I'd fallen into an artificial pond or something. Of course Mom found out later anyway, but it's something we all laugh about now since we all kinda share a quirky, sometimes dark sense of humor, so I don't hold anything against him. It was my own damn fault after all. This was my dad, and not a funny story, but made me realize my dad did love me. My stepmom had started to charge me rent when I turned 18. I accepted as it meant I didn't have to do as much chores and can for the most part be left alone. It was about $200 a month. At the time I was making $9/h, which was slightly above minimum wage for my state. I was miserable at the time, so I saved up to get a refurbished Xbox One to play games, and I asked my dad if I could just use the small TV in the guest bedroom in my room. This was a TV no one used. He said he will think about, which meant he had to ask the overlord. A couple days later he said that I can, but she wanted to add $25 a month to my rent to use it. I broke down. I told him that I was saving up to try and leave and she is the reason my sister left. He then said it's okay, you are paying rent. He didn't make me pay the extra 25 and it turned out that he saved the money I paid for rent and gave it to me for my deposit on my first apartment. It was a "we won't tell your stepmother about this" and made our relationship a little bit better. It's not a grand or funny story, but I resented him up until that moment and he started to defend me more in arguments against her after my sister left. Also they are now divorced, so small win. My dad is a huge watch enthusiast, and one of his favorites brands is Panerai. One day, he took me to a Tourneau AD so he can have his watch fixed. While in there, I picked up the words appraise and installments and I immediately knew he was going to buy something big. He actually got into debt over watches and it got so bad, they'd fight over it and almost got a divorce. So I went up to him and asked, "Dad, are you buying another watch?" He just got real silent, and even the salesperson sort of backed away. He started pleading with me not to tell Mom about it. If I didn't, he'd buy me an Xbox 360, along with 3 new games of my choice. And so we did. It was an awkward drive home. About a week later, he went into my room with tears flowing down his cheeks. That was when I found out he also schemed my college savings for his watch buying. But even knowing, I wasn't even mad. I just wanted him to stop wasting our money and just be happy with us. With that Panerai he just bought. I kept my promise, so long as he doesn't buy another one for 5 years. My mom to this day still doesn't know, he sold off most of his collection, still has the Panerai to this day, and paid off his credit cards and loans. He still apologizes to me about it from time to time, including today. I'm just glad it's all behind us. I'm not a dad, but I have a good one with my old man. I was playing football with my dad when I was 5. He used to be a real baller and grew up with a lot of guys who made it into less relevant professional leagues. So naturally when I started playing he wanted to show off and teach some of his tricks. We were playing in the backyard and he wanted to show me how to make a good cross with decent curving. He placed a garbage bin on the opposite end and told me he was gonna place the ball there with a single hit. Naturally I was excited, but the first time he tried he actually kicked it so high that it broke my mother's office room. She's a writer, so keeping her place organized and without too much wind/sunshine was one of the most important things for her. Dad took me to eat some delicious milkshake and told me that if my mom asks about the window I should say it was a bird and that we took it to a vet so mommy wouldn't get angry. Obviously he said don't tell your mom about the milkshake either. At first my dad told his version and my mom kinda believed it since we lived near a park and there were a lot of birds near the house. One weekend my mom asks me if I don't want to learn about handball with her in the backyard, but I tell her I don't want to play with balls there because I don't want to break any more windows. Oh boy, that was a big fight all week. Later on, then my parents sat me down and told me that I should take responsibility for things that I did even if they can make someone angry or sad. Funny thing is it wasn't even me, so I never wanted to play football with my dad for a few years after that, and I never lied/omitted things like that from my mom ever again. Hey guys, up here. I think it's only fair to share mine. My father passed a year ago and I'm spending the day eating his favorite foods. Here are 3 of my favorites don't tell your mother stories. I was at my dad's house one weekend and it's when I got my PS3 and FIFA. My dad always wanted to play it, so after we went to our place of worship Friday night we spent the whole night playing FIFA and eating pizza and cereal. My mom is against card games because she thinks they encourage gambling. My dad loves all card games and is amazing at a lot of them. So he taught me to play all casino games, blackjack, Texas Hold'em, and Keno. I got pretty good at poker and I would play on the first Red Dead to the point I made over $200 in game. I got busted when my mom watched me play and asked me how I knew to play poker. I never told her my dad taught me, I just said I looked online. I was big into sports to the point I messed up my ankle. Boxing, soccer, and basketball. I would always have some scar or injury which wasn't a big deal. One weekend I was cutting down a tree with my dad and I got cut by the tree to the point I was bleeding. Asian moms are very overprotective and my dad said don't tell your mother. I told her I tripped while I was played soccer and got caught on a plant. I said plant so I wouldn't be completely lying.